Welcome back, everybody. We're still waiting for people to come in, so if you're out there in the hall, please come on in. If you're in the restrooms, hurry up and come. I don't know if you can hear something. Just some housekeeping. We have 2 more sessions, one with the break, and then another break. In that last break, we'll have coffee and cookies. As is our Baptist tradition, we're supposed to feed you till you want to throw up. So that's, in case you're already thinking what your next meal is, there'll be cookies at that break, along with coffee. I'm going to introduce our next session, our presenters together. Part of it is because it's the One Tandy project. Dr. Janzen is our latest faculty addition to the Tandy Institute. He's actually housed in our Scarborough College. Most Egyptologists tend to be in an honors program, and so when our previous president wanted to hire an Egyptologist to expand our program, we convinced him to go into the college, so one, for job security, but he's one of our cross-listed in our graduate program. And the other presenter, Terry Nichols, is a PhD student, and he's jointly Mark's and mine as he's doing his dissertation and his studies on Egypt and it's in context with Israel. So Dr. Janzen kicks him on one side, and then I kick him on the other side, and hopefully we'll develop a research dissertation out of that. But Terry also comes with skills in software development and IT. And so you're going to see with these 2 presentations, you're able to put the epigraphy, the hieroglyphics, and also the science and development of whatever Terry does. I'm trying to the technology aspect of looking at these deteriorating walls and being able to reconstruct some of this history. So without further ado, Dr. Janzen, come on up.
All right, well, good afternoon. It is my distinct privilege to give you an overview of the Tandy Institute's Epigraphy project in Egypt. And we are very grateful to be a part of the Karnak Hypostyle Hall project, so a couple thank yous to give out. First to Doctors Peter Brand and Jean Revez. Jean's not here today, but they are the directors of the project that graciously invited us to join, and to the Tandy Institute for putting all this together, and specifically to Marcella, who did all the real work putting this together. So don't let Tom, Steve, or I fool you. It is really her legwork that made this day possible, so thank you very much. Now, our overall project focuses on, the Karnak Great Hypostyle Hall project, that is, focuses on the Hypostyle Hall itself, which it is a wonder, but the Tandy project focuses specifically on the western wall of the Cordola Cache, drawing your attention to it here with the red arrow. Then you've got a couple of the pamphlets talk about where we're at on the wall, a couple of the handouts, I guess I should say, and talk a little bit about epigraphy as well. Now, as we've seen before, when Ramses II died, he at long last passed the throne on to his son and successor, Merneptah, his 13th son, as Dr. Brand's already explained. Merneptah is most famous for the so-called Israel stela, which is more strictly the Libyan victory stela, but has the famous reference to Israel. Merneptah, being the 13th of Ramses' children, actually has importance for our wall, as you'll see in a few minutes. But by the time Merneptah took the throne, Egypt has recovered from the tumultuous Amarna period. Ramesside predecessors of Merneptah, being Ramses I, Seti I, and Ramses II, have reestablished Egyptian control over the southern Levant, and they, of course, have celebrated their military deeds in a wide variety of locations with these larger-than-life scenes where Pharaoh subdues enemy forces, and, of course, he's always victorious. Now, that brings up a problem for Merneptah. Most of the prime real estate at Karnak, especially in the environs of the Hypostyle Hall, where a good Ramesside ruler should celebrate their military valor, has already been taken by his predecessors. Every space on the columns, if you walk the hypostyle hall, every square inch seemingly is covered in either military scenes, religious scenes, or texts. Even up underneath the roof, you look up, you'll see, in fact, those are some of the more colorful scenes because they're not weathered. But they spared no expense, covering basically every square inch of the place. So where is Pharaoh Merneptah to celebrate his victories? And what he decides to do is to celebrate his victories in a space that's still fairly accessible to the public at the place on this particular slide that says Hittite Treaty. That does mean we have another complication with our wall, as you'll see in a second. But his little slice of the pie at Karnak, near the hypostyle hall, is in fact the western wall of the so-called Cour de la Cachée. And our project, again, is right where on this slide it says Hittite Treaty. But the wall Merneptah chose was not entirely clean, if you will. There is earlier material from Ramses II's abbreviated attempt to celebrate the Battle of Kadesh. All right, let me orient you to what you're seeing here. This is the hypostyle hall. Along the blue is the south wall of the hypostyle hall. The yellow is the western wall of the Cour de la Cachée, our wall, if you will. Along the blue, along the south wall of the hypostyle hall, Ramses began a series of reliefs to celebrate his victories at the Battle of Kadesh, his most famous victory, which is really a stalemate. The scenes are so large that they end up wrapping the corner and going around the corner to the western wall of the Cour de la Cachée. Again, that's the one in yellow. So this, though, is a major problem for Egyptian artistic sensibilities because they do not prefer having scenes that round corners. It's too asymmetrical, and Ramses eventually scraps the whole project. Along the south wall, again, that's in blue, he instead celebrates his wars in Western Asia. And on the western wall of the Cour de la Cachée, he really just celebrates the Hittite Treaty, which is actually right here in between the pilasters. Here's the Hittite Treaty. Now, for decades, Egyptologists assumed that the scenes on these two walls, being the south wall of the hypostyle hall and the western wall of the Cour de la Cachée, were actually from a series of reliefs, all of it commissioned by Ramses. Then in the late 70s and into the mid-80s, the late Frank Yurko presented a very compelling case that the battle reliefs on the western wall of the Cour de la Cachée should in fact be ascribed to Merneptah. Naturally, a very robust debate ensued. And while the authorship point is crucial, and I will return to that in a few minutes, the main point for now is that scholars engaging in the debate did not and still do not have access to a scientific epigraphic publication of the scenes and texts on this wall. So basically, the discussion is happening amongst Egyptologists, archaeologists, historians, biblicists, and they're all accessing the same material but with nothing definitive to reference. This is a major problem in trying to interpret the scenes and texts, but especially the artistic scenes. So we aim to correct that. That's the main contribution that we will hopefully be making in a few years to the field, is the definitive scientific epigraphic publication, taking what is in three-dimensional space on the wall and putting it into two-dimensional space accurately, both in print and digitally. And I'll let Terry handle most of the digital stuff here in the next talk. Another thing I want you to take from this simple picture, two more things. You can tell the wall is badly damaged, missing humongous chunks of the wall. Ours is not a particularly pretty wall, but as I like to tell people, it has a very nice personality. At any rate, the other thing to note here is the wall is very much exposed to sun and wind and just the elements in general. This makes our work, I think, all the more important. There's not a shade covering. There's no roof here. The glyphs are very badly damaged, even where they do survive. And so I think it's not entirely salvage epigraphy, but it does have an aspect here where we want to preserve the wall before anything more can happen to it. So that's a quick look at most of the wall. More scientifically, this is our wall in all its glory from a more centered angle. This is the most important thing we achieved in the first season, back in the end of 2016. This is our wall with the, basically this is the result of about 400 high-definition photographs taken at regular intervals along the wall, trying to be dead center the whole way. But because human beings are involved, even if I'm trying my best to take a picture like so, I might move my head just a little bit and mess up the angle. So you run it through Scan, and with enough photos, with enough overlap, the software can tell you exactly what the wall looks like. And this is actually a compressed version of this. The actual file is over 1 gigabyte in size and doesn't particularly play nicely with PowerPoints or jump drives or any of the other technology that we present with. So this is just a compressed version of it, but you get an idea of how the wall really looks in all its glory. Now, overall, we have is Pharaoh attacking 3 fortified settlements. And then there's the scene up above that you've already seen in a couple of our talks today that we'll return to. And then off to the right of the image, you have a series of captives being bound and marched back to Egypt, essentially. All of which is unfortunately heavily damaged. All right, I hope this is clear behind me here, but in the yellow box is basically the Hittite Treaty of Ramses the Great. This is the part of the wall that pops out, sticks out very clearly, crystal clear in Merneptah's own day. To the right of that, we have the red box, a scene where Pharaoh attacks Ashkelon. This is roughly the midpoint of the wall. And now we're taking a closer look at the Ashkelon scene. It is also the best preserved scene on the wall, which I think says it all about the state of preservation here. Now, while we're still in the process of drawing the glyphs, so I'm going to show you this in an image instead of a drawing, the blue box highlights the only toponym we have on the whole wall, Ishkarina, or Ashkelon. So we can definitively state this is Ashkelon. Merneptah himself tells us that this is Ashkelon. If we take a closer look at one of our rough drafts of our collation sheet, we can note a few features. Before I do that, just a quick word on our methodology here. So what we have is we have the orthophoto that I showed you a moment ago. Then we sort of crop that, splice it up, and enlarge it. It's such high definition that you can really zoom in and still have no pixelation. From that, we make digital drawings in Adobe Illustrator, vector drawings basically. And then we take those drawings after we print them out to the field, and then we collate to make sure that those drawings are accurate. This is a multi-step process. This is just after the first draft of this. So we're still collating. Nothing I'm showing you in terms of the drawings are a finished product yet. Another couple field seasons to really, I think, finish most of these. At any rate, you can see a couple of interesting things here. Note Pharaoh is actually off screen. But right here you have his hooves, the hooves of his horses, I should say. And then I've drawn your attention to certain features just to show you some of the uniqueness of these scenes. The red arrow shows an Egyptian soldier attacking a gate, and I might add rather realistically with an axe-type weapon. In the blue, another soldier, Egyptian, climbs a ladder, and it's realistic enough that he's put his shield on his back. If you know these scenes from Assyrian art, they'll often be holding a spear and a shield and like hovering over a ladder. It's almost superhero-like, but here I think we have a bit more realism, at least at that point. Then there's the green arrow, which if you can see it closely, hopefully it doesn't pixelate on a screen this large, you see a defender offering a chalice to Pharaoh. He's like beseeching Pharaoh for mercy, and there's little lines coming out of it as if to say it's got steam or something coming out of it. Kruder earlier attempts to draw this scene, actually one in particular, has a whole black and white scene, and then this cup is colored in gold, as if the defender is offering the Holy Grail. So we have some strange things in the history of how this wall has been studied and drawn in the past. And then we have the yellow arrow, the very scientifically named by my team, Dying Dancing Dude, who is already taking a shot to the head from Pharaoh. That's the line going through his head. But note how large he is. You don't have to necessarily have the grid on here, which we do use within Illustrator, to tell that he is anywhere from 4 to 8 times larger than other individuals. Why would this be such a large figure? I can give you 2 theories. I can't prove either. One is it's just space filler. The blank spot up here is the hieroglyphs that we haven't drawn yet. But this could just be to fill space, but I suspect it's a different reason. I think he might be a leader. We see from time to time certain clues in Egyptian art where they highlight a specifically important enemy, and he's already defeated, which would be, again, referencing the glory and might of Pharaoh, as he's already defeated the most important of the enemy, even at the onset of battle, and now the defenders are begging for mercy. So that's one theory there, but you see several interesting features just from Ashkelon, the scene for Ashkelon alone. Now let's connect this very briefly to the Israel stela, which we've heard plenty about already, and we're going to have even more of a breakdown of the Israel stela, so that's not my purpose here. But just note the relevant part that mentions Israel before that mentions Ashkelon, Gezer, Yenoam, and then Israel. And we have Ashkelon most definitely on this wall. This is why many scholars connect these scenes to the Israel stela, and I think they're by and large correct about that. And Yurko, who we talked about a minute ago, believed that these scenes do connect to the victory stela. And again, that has considerable merit. It'd be a lot easier to clinch this if we had the other toponyms. But as is so often the case with the accidents of preservation, we are not blessed with that. That said, I do believe that Gezer and Yenoam are likely intended in the scene on the left of the Hittite treaty, the north end of the wall. Here, Pharaoh attacks 2 fortified settlements. The bottom version is the one that time permits me to actually mention today, but this is even more damage than the rest of the wall. The north end is a mess, quite frankly. And Yurko's analysis that the scenes date to Merneptah is basically based on the cartouche from this scene, which we'll turn to in a few minutes. But here, Merneptah storms a fortified town. Either Gezer or Yenoam, if the idea that it syncs up with the Israel stela is correct. But absent the toponyms, we can't say which one's which. Then it would be a matter of which way do you think the scene proceeds. Personally, I think this is Gezer, because I think we go from the middle, we skip the Hittite treaty, and then we go around. Bottom, then top, and then very top, the broken scene with that might be the Israelites. But we simply don't know. But like the south wall of the hypostyle hall, there is a palimpsest on the western wall of the court, just the north end, just this scene left of the Hittite treaty. A palimpsest being a scene underneath a scene. So it's really detective work for us at this point. This is the earliest edition of the Battle of Kadesh that I mentioned before that Ramses decides doesn't look right and scraps. The blue box is trying to show you one clear example of that palimpsest, which these are wavy lines, which are water. We saw from Dr. Hoffmeyer's talk, you saw wavy lines for the canals and for the Nile River. This is the same thing here, where wavy lines representing water, and this is from the Kadesh pictorial presentation. This is the Orontes River. Nobody, to my knowledge, that has ever studied this wall at all, nobody whatsoever doubts that there's a Kadesh palimpsest underneath the main scene. This is basically unanimous. But again, because it had to bend around the corner, Ramses and his artisans scrapped the project, meaning we have to figure out exactly where his palimpsests start and Merneptah's work, or whoever the author is, starts. If we take a closer look at just one section, I just want to show you how we can, with our method and the digital epigraphy that we're doing, really point out a lot of palimpsests here. This also, I think, highlights the importance of the drawing versus just a photo. You may be wondering, well, if you got all these high-def photos, what's the point of the rest of it? Because the drawings allow us to do layers and remove certain things that are sort of clutter, or allow us to do layers to say, okay, here's the Ramses Kadesh palimpsest layer, here's the scene on top of it, here's a glyphs layer, here's a layer which is just all the damage, so we can remove these things and make it much easier on the eye to actually observe in a talk like this or in an article, etc. Note we have the partial remains of horses, a tiny bit of chariot cabs, and then various torsos, really, of soldiers, poorly delineated, never finished. This was first season. Here's the result after using our methodology. After the second season, again, still unfinished, but I think it is proof positive that what we're doing, I think, can bear fruit here. Now look at all the palimpsests we found. The hieroglyphs are partially drawn. We're not done with those. Those are from Merneptah, but I wanted to show you how the horses and so forth cut right into the hieroglyphs. But they're actually under them. But that's important for the layers. Again, we just take the hieroglyphs out if we wanted to show a publication of just the palimpsests. But now we have dozens, actually, of soldiers. Previous scholars thought there were a handful of palimpsests here and there. But this would have been the sort of rough sketch. This is like putting it in pencil for the Kadesh campaign. But he never finishes it because of that aesthetic compromise. Now, let's talk about this potential scene that may or may not depict the Israelites. Yurko's conclusions proved very contentious because he thought that this was the Israelites. This is the top scene, badly broken. Dr. Brand showed it earlier as well. In reaction to Yurko's analysis, ran the full gamut from excited acceptance to outright disagreement. It's published in scientific Egyptology journals. It's published in Biblical Archaeology Review, right? It's extremely important, very important treatment, but it really runs the gamut in terms of scholarly reaction. And again, crucially, scholars that wanted to weigh in on the debate did not have access to a fully scientific epigraphic publication. For my part, as likely as I think it is that they're the Israelites because of the sequencing of events in the stela and syncing the stela with the wall, there is nothing here ethnically in the art that could mark that. We can't clinch that. It will remain forever a theory because there's nothing particularly distinctive about their feet and legs, right? That's not where you're going to find a nice marker of ethnicity. So if we happen to do better than that in the future, I'd be very excited about that. But by and large, we don't have anything but generic Canaanite, Western Asian enemies depicted here. However, because of the Israel stela mentioning Ashkelon, Gezer, Yanoam, Israel, it would make sense to assume Israel is somewhere on the wall. This is the only scene left. Right? But again, we can't clinch that. Here's another look at it. Again, the Ashkelon scene, just to make sure we're sort of orienting on the wall, is right below it. But now if you look at this, how much of this is missing? It's really the bottom third, at best bottom half of the scene. So we have to be careful not going too far with this conclusion here. All right, let me highlight a few unique features, and then we'll talk about the cartouches for a few minutes and call it good. Here we have something not typically seen in Ramesside art. This is fairly rare in Ramesside art, and that is the yellow box is actually a human hand. If you look just to the right of it, you'll see the rest of the captive, and his amputated hand, his arm there, ends at the wrist. This is not something that Ramses typically depicts. So if the scenes on the Western Wall are from Ramses the Great, this would be very much an anomaly. Just again, incidental evidence. Normally we have something like this, where you see the knife is actually about to cut the wrist, or we have piles of hands in Egyptian art. But the idea of a hand that's sort of hanging in the air, or maybe they intend it for it to be already on the ground, but just by itself, is unique. Another unique feature, and frankly this is an artistic screw-up, are these vultures, which are both drawn in both types of our standard vulture for Egyptian iconography. You have one where the wings are fully outlined, and this is actually in sunk relief and then raised relief inside, and one where they're just fully articulated without the outline. Normally they're the exact same. They're always together and they're the exact same. They could be either, but they're not normally one and another. This might be indicative of the job being rushed. Again, it doesn't seem like something that Ramses the Great would do, and is not something you'll find in his scenes. So this is just incidental data that I think suggests we don't have an author like Ramses the Great who has literally hundreds of scenes all over Egypt. And I just have to point this one out because it's my favorite result from season 2. Here we have an important lesson. You can't always trust that the blocks have been restored by previous scholars in the correct place. Note the red arrow. These are horse hooves. But the horse doesn't match there. You can't really even move it over because the back of the horse is correct, right? There's no wiggle room here. So we don't know where this block goes, unless it goes with this captive because he's from Narnia or something. Barring that as a solution, I think we have to conclude that this block is actually placed in the wrong spot. If you want to be really technical, you could also note that the feet, the actual human feet, are too small and don't sync up in terms of the scale with the rest of the captives. All right, really quickly now to the all-important topic of the cartouches. Again, this is what Yurko's analysis is based on. And though we can't really confirm his theory on the Israelites, his analysis of the cartouches is mostly correct. To try to help you out, here's just a quick drawing of the two names that we see in the black and yellow. These are not one-to-one drawings of these particular cartouches, just examples of the names. What we have is the names of Merneptah and Seti II. What we need to determine is there anyone else, and is it for sure Merneptah and for sure Seti II? Just in the interest of time, let me highlight two hieroglyphs that are unique, one for each person's name. So one for Merneptah, one for Seti II. Whoops, wrong way. Red arrow here for the sun disk for Horus, which is unique to Merneptah's name. You can see it clearly in the actual photo from the wall. For Seti II, I think the easiest one to see is the reed leaf for Amun. in his name. These are unique to each of their names, but clearly visible on the wall. And again, we're still working through trying to make sure we scientifically accurately draw this. This is the most time-consuming thing in the whole project. But we have a bit of a mystery here. We have a whodunit, essentially. Merneptah's name has clearly been tampered with, altered, erased, and traces actually have survived, but it is clear that someone tried to hack his name out. But why would Seti II do that? Seti II is Merneptah's rightful heir, his son and rightful heir. Thankfully, we have a pretty clear solution, I think, to this, and that is there's an interloper ruling southern Egypt for about 4 years after the reign of Merneptah named Amen-Mes. Now, Amen-Mes probably comes from a cadet branch, a splinter branch of the Ramesside family. As Dr. Brand noted, we're talking about a man who had 50, 60 plus sons, dozens of sons. Now, who would have an agenda, an axe to grind, if you will, with Merneptah and want to demonstrate that, no, Merneptah's not the rightful king. That's the wrong branch of the royal family. I'm going to hack his name out. And we see this all over Karnak and Luxor temples, where Merneptah's name's hacked out and then Seti's name is replaced. But why not Amen-Mes's name? Because by the time he's done with this part of the project, he never gets his own name carved because Seti II conquers all of Egypt again and reasserts his own rightful control of the entirety of Egypt. He sees these damaged cartouches and places his own name in as if to say, Pharaoh is the one doing these, and well, hey, I'm Seti II, I'm the rightful Pharaoh, so it's okay, I'm not going to restore Merneptah, I'll put my own name in. There are other blocks that have actually a erased name of Seti II as well, so there's other data that suggests that this is definitely the right interpretation. Peter Brand has done an article on this recently in a festschrift for Ken Kitchen that I think is a very definitive treatment of it, and I have yet to see any scholarly reaction. So I think the debate is starting to be all but over on this particular point with Amen-Mes. Crucially, in these cartouches, there is no trace of the name Ramses II. But we have these palimpsests from Ramses II. What happened, I believe, is because of that compromise of the scene rounding the corner and he erases everything, what he does 15 years later-ish, he plasters over the wall, puts the Hittite stela roughly in the middle so it like pops out nicely, plasters, if he needs to, the rest of it, although there's nothing carved there in his time, and calls it good. Merneptah comes along and says, I have to celebrate my great deeds as Pharaoh. Where can I do this? Near the hypostyle hall. I can't erase Seti's work or my father Ramses' work, but there is this scene with just the Hittite stela on the western wall of the Cour de la Cachée, and so that is where he celebrates his artistic version of the victory stela, essentially. And then Amen-Mes comes along and erases his name. Seti puts his name in after he defeats Amen-Mes, and here we have our mess, hopefully, I think, sorted out. So, quick conclusion here. Our ongoing goals are pretty obvious, but we want to continue the scientific epigraphic analysis for ultimately publication, continue to study the original author issue, which I think is really starting to come into very clear focus. This also has implications for the chronology and succession at the end of the 19th dynasty, again, things that Peter Brand mentioned in his talk, and then also see if there's any blocks in the courtyard that would fit our wall, and there's a French team actually doing that have actually restored a few blocks, so we get to redo our photos this next season. So thank you for your time. As you can see, we've got a lot of detective work to do, but we're very excited about the project, and that's all I got. Thank you.
All right. Well, my name is Terry Nichols, and good afternoon. I hope you guys aren't too tired after lunch. I will do my best to make this a fun and lively presentation. I'm a PhD student here at Southwestern in archaeology, and I'm a senior staff member with the Tandy's portion of the project at the Hypostyle Hall. To begin, I just wanted to thank the Tandy for hosting this conference. I wanted to thank the Tandy as well, and my supervisor, Dr. Ortiz, for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to thank Dr. Janzen for his help in this, and Dr. Brand as well for his availability, letting Tandy and Swibitz join the Hypostyle Hall project. I am talking today about using modern technology for ancient reliefs. Now, why am I talking about modern technology? Modern technology is part of my background. For over a decade, I was a part of the IT field. I was an IT tech and IT manager. I went all over the East Coast doing stuff with technical things. I'm a level 3 certified IT technician with 4 different professional certifications. I'm also a professionally certified AV technician as well. So the IT was always part of my life. And then I learned of this thing called archaeology. Actually, it was always part of my scholarly pursuit. It was always something on the side. And then as I got further into my graduate studies, I made the full changeover into archaeology. What I do with the Tandy, and specifically with the Egypt project, is roll in this use of technology into different things to that effect. Earlier, Dr. Coyle got up and did his, quote, old school presentation. All he had was a title slide. I am not doing old school. I'm doing new school. And just to show you that, I made sure that Merneptah up there had his iPhone. That is the new iPhone 10, and he is taking a selfie before he smites his enemies. So I wanted to make sure you guys saw that. We are going to go new school. We're going to talk about technology and how we can use IT to look backwards and help us enhance history and the way we learn about it and the way we use it. So if you're into photography, if you're into graphic design, if you're into just IT stuff, we can use all of those skills and roll those into our work here in history. And so just being a graphic designer doesn't mean you have to just design someone's logo the rest of your life. You can actually get involved in doing history in graphic design. And so it can be fun, and I think it's fun. So, all right. To begin, let's just give a quick overview of what I'll be doing today. I'm basically giving you different methods for recording reliefs. And these are the basic methods we're going to review today. We're going to go over archaeoacoustics, high-resolution photography, 3D metrology. There's a word you guys didn't know before today. 3D metrology. Under 3D metrology, you get ideas of laser scanning and photogrammetry. And then lastly, we'll follow up with epigraphy. So we're going to focus, though, on those 3 items there: laser scanning, photogrammetry, and epigraphy. But let's talk about archaeoacoustics. When you're talking about mapping an ancient site, the first thing you don't turn to is the idea of, well, sound. If I told you to go map an ancient site, if I have these ancient reliefs, you're not going to turn to your stereo and figure out how your stereo works in this ancient site. However, using archaeoacoustics is something that we can do. The idea of archaeoacoustics is the merging of 2 disciplines, the discipline of acoustics and the discipline of archaeology. It is the discipline of sound in connection to historic sites and structures. Let me demonstrate this. The whole idea that you can use archaeoacoustics for is something called sound mapping. We use sound mapping technology all the time. When you're building a new concert venue, you bring in a sound mapper. You bring in a professional company who comes in and sets up their speakers in certain areas and maps how the sound is going to sound in a facility. Matter of fact, they did that for this room. This isn't that room. This is a very similar staged room. But what they do is they bring in special sensors, and they set up speakers throughout the room. Those speakers project a sound, and the sensors pick up something called sound pressure levels. Those sound pressure levels then create a map across the room. That map shows you dead spots. It shows you hot spots. It shows you the areas how you can best fill the room, which allows the tech to then arrange the speakers in such a way to properly fill a room. What you do with archaeoacoustics, however, is you're basically reverse engineering the process. You position a sound source in a specific spot and see how the sound then projects across the site. In the image on screen, right in the middle, there is basically a small little stage area or stairs where they set up a sound source, and they had to set up sensors throughout the rest of the room. And those sensors then picked up how that sound was transmitted across an area. What that does is it allows us to see something called a soundscape. The idea of a soundscape is actually coming out of the idea of landscape archaeology. Landscape archaeology is a new interpretive framework that we use in archaeology to help us understand a site. Landscape archaeology refers to what a site looks like, what a site is looking out at, the landscape around it. A soundscape is something very similar. A soundscape is not what does the site look like, is what does the site sound like? In a room like the Hypostyle Hall, which is completely closed in, how do the sound bounce around? What does it look like when they run their different festivals in there? When you're at a Greek or Roman theater, how can they project and how can you hear in the very back row over 4,000 people when they didn't have modern projection technology? Sound mapping and archaeoacoustics can do that. And so, properly, it's the first thing that you can do in the modern era to help us understand ancient sites. So I just wanted to go through that real quick for you. Next, the idea of high-resolution photography. High-resolution photography is something that, well, we're quite frankly pretty familiar with. You see, most of us carry better phones in our pockets today than professional photographers could get 5 to 10 years ago. I want to give you an example of this. This is a picture of the cartouches of Ramses II taken at the Hypostyle Hall. They're zoomed in. It can be hard to see, but those are clearly the Ramses II cartouches. However, that's the original picture. The original picture is of one of the great columns in the Hypostyle Hall. Those great columns are 20 meters tall, almost 70 feet. I took that photo with this phone. It's not even a professional camera. It was my cell phone. And that's how far you can zoom in and still see very, very clear detail. You can clearly make out Ramses II, the cartouches. You can clearly see those are his names from that far away. And again, you're talking 80 feet almost, because I'm at an angle. High-resolution photography allows us to do that. So by taking an actual professional camera and using it, it is something that you can get even better resolution and better detail. However, high-resolution photography is only the first step in recording an ancient monument, because it doesn't capture all the details. While the picture of the column certainly captures a lot, the epigraphic survey done by the University of Memphis and the Karnak Great Hypostyle Hall project produces this. This is what the column actually looks like, and this is something you have in your handouts right down here at the bottom. That shows you the detail that epigraphy captures that, quite frankly, a camera doesn't. There are still details present on these columns that you cannot see in real life. You cannot see in a camera lens. You can only see in real life. Very careful detail there. All right, let's move on. 3D metrology. 3D metrology is the science of measurement in 3 dimensions. It's the XYZ matrix. You may not know what that was, but it's pretty easy to understand. X and Y denote height and depth. That's pretty standard. The Z is the new dimension. Z is what's going to give you depth for that 3rd dimension. So you have height and width with the X and Y. Z denotes depth in the 3rd dimension. And we can do 3D metrology. We can do measurement in 3 dimensions in 3 different ways. We can do manual measurements. We can use a machine to do manual measurements, or we can use 3D scanners. Manual measurements are pretty easy to understand. I can give you a ruler and send you out to the field and go, say, measure stuff. I can give you a caliper and you can get very fine measurements, but it's still you walking out measuring every single thing. We showed you the Hypostyle Hall. A number of our presenters have showed you pictures from all over the Hypostyle Hall. If you were to measure every single inscription in the Hypostyle Hall, you'd be there several lifetimes. So instead, we can use several things. We can use a machine to do that, but a machine touching the wall might cause damage. There are machines that they use out there for, again, creating cell phones, creating and recreating soda bottles is actually the most important thing that they use it for. But they go through and they can actually measure machines, and machines measure everything for you. Or we can go into the 20th century or the 21st century when we can use 3D scanners. 3D scanners uses light rather than contact to scan complete surfaces. A 3D scanner creates what's called a point cloud. A point cloud is very, very specific extracted measurements of each point in a photo. And you can see an example of a point cloud down there in the corner. There are 2 methods that we have today for using 3D scanners. One is laser scanning, and the second is photogrammetry. Let's focus first on laser scanning. So 3D scanners use light In this case, that light is in the form of a focused laser. And that laser scans surfaces to create a point cloud. You can see a picture here of a laser scanner scanning a bridge. Half of the bridge is the detail that it got just from the laser. The other half is the actual bridge itself. It's just showing you the detail that you can get with laser scanning. In laser scanning, it defines each point in the point cloud by accurately firing laser pulses that reflect back from an object surface. To give you an idea, this is how bats fly around. They use sonar or radar. We're using very, very similar technology. But instead of sound waves to fly around, we're using light waves to visualize it. Each point of that point cloud is a directly measured point. We have a very, very, very detailed measurements for every single point in that point cloud. Laser scanning does not depend on camera quality. And more importantly, laser scanning is not affected by the sun. It could be cloudy, it could be rainy. Well, probably not rainy because that would refract the sun, refract the lasers. But it can be cloudy, it could be sunny, and it won't matter. With photography, we know that sunlight is important. We need to have the right sunlight at the right angle at the right time of day. Otherwise, your pictures look completely washed out or not bright enough. A second method of laser scanning is something called structured light 3D scanners. This essentially combines photography and laser scanning. What it does is you have a projector in the middle. That projector projects a laser. You then have cameras on each side of the laser taking pictures. And as that laser bounces one way or another based on whatever it's picking up, it gets one camera or the other will get a better photo. And so you basically have a huge data set of pictures whenever you're scanning that surface. Laser scanners, though, have been around for some time. The old method was something called a total station. Please, I don't want to get in trouble by calling it old. And Dr. Davis, please don't dock me for calling the total station old. But it is the old method. Basically, what the total station did, it was a single station that was set up in the field, and that total station created outlines of difficult-to-measure objects. And I have before you an actual, this is actually from Tel Dan. This wireframe object was part of the Tel Dan excavations. This is what they were doing back in the early 2000s. I say back in the early 2000s, but I had already graduated from college, married, and owned my own house by then. So that wasn't that long ago for me. But that was nearly 20 years ago. And this is the technology that they were using then. The technology that they used at the total station only created 3D wireframe objects. So that was early 2000s. Well, here's the new results. Here's what you can do with laser scanning today. I'd say they've made a bit of progress. What you are looking at is not a picture. This is a point cloud from a laser scanner. This specifically is from the Perrine Fountain in ancient Corinth in Greece. This is pretty phenomenal, and this is what they do. This is a company called SciArc. SciArc is actually an acronym. It stands for Cyber Archive. It's a company that's going out and has scanned 500 of the World Heritage Sites set up by UNESCO. They've scanned 500 of those, and they've created these 3D models and put them in there. And they have this archive that you can access for a nominal fee, of course. Luckily, they were able to get into Baghdad before everything happened in the 2000s. So they have a nice digital archive of Baghdad. It's nice because parts that they scan no longer exist. But this is what you can do with laser scanning. There's the old method, and behind it's the new method. All right. Laser scanning is highly accurate. Every single point in that point cloud had a very specific measurement on the XYZ axis. However, and there's always a however or there's always a but, it is expensive. Tripod-mounted scanners cost somewhere in the range of $10,000 to $40,000. That's just, pocket change, right? We can all grab one of those. All right, let's just get a handheld one. So you can get a handheld one, and that's only going to cost you a mere $7,000 for a very basic one. And that $7,000 one means I can scan this mouse. I'm not scanning a whole wall. I'm scanning the mouse. And you can pay $15,000 and scan something bigger, like a laptop. That's about the size that they can do. So that is the problem with laser scanning. It is extremely accurate, but it's extremely cost prohibitive. On top of that, specialists are needed to perform the scans in the field and then input their scans and build the models in 3D. It's absolutely phenomenal what they can do. However, a significant cost prohibition on top of that. So what do we do here at the Tandy? What are the methods that we use here? Part of 3D metrology I mentioned was something called photogrammetry. Photogrammetry essentially is a software program that uses algorithms that utilize the action of light. That's a very technical term. What do I mean? They're literally reading the wavelengths of light that were captured in a photograph to produce precise measurements of an area. When it does that, as you run it through the software, it creates a point cloud very similar to what laser scanning does. Each point, though, is not directly measured like in laser scanning, but uses algorithms calculated afterwards to find and match details to extract geometry. It does require a high-quality camera, and it is affected by sunlight, meaning you can only take your pictures at certain times a day. In our first season, we had to take pictures only in that 1 to 1.5 hour window. Every afternoon, we had to wait for it to hit, about noon, 1 o'clock, somewhere in there. And then we had to get our pictures in. And once the sun reached a certain angle, we had to stop, because you have to hit it in a certain period of light. Photogrammetry utilizes high-resolution photography. It combines multiple pictures together for the creation of what's called an orthomosaic photo. This is something that Dr. Janzen showed you earlier. This is our ortho photo, created of nearly 400 photos, taken, like I said, during a particular time frame every day, going right down the wall. It's called an orthomosaic because it takes a mosaic, it stitches all of the photos together and creates one large massive photo. And as we said, this is our compressed version. What photogrammetry does also, though, properly in the second step, is it creates 3D models. Here's a model of the cartouches that we've been talking about. What we've been talking about this whole afternoon is Merneptah. So now we're focusing down in on our actual project at Karnak. What are we doing there? And in just 2 days, Dr. Janzen and myself are flying to Indiana. We're going to Indiana University for a digital Egyptology conference. And we are presenting our findings, examining Merneptah's cartouches here, or we'll say a unknown pharaoh's cartouches here. What I have done is I have separated myself from the debate, saying I'm not making any assumptions regarding the name of the pharaoh. Let's just look at the depths. Let's look at what the 3D model can tell us. And what we did was we went through and we created 3D models of these, and we did two things. One, I created on what you see here is called a scalar field model. This tells you heights and depths of everything. Green being the brightest green being the highest on the map, the blues being the lowest portion of the map, and it shows you that. You can then click on each point and find depth data. I was also then able to take that cartouche and flip it on its side, like this. You can't do that in the real world. Well, you can do it once, but you'll never ever be invited back. So it's not a great idea. But that's why you can use 3D models. We can use photogrammetry to produce 3D models. We took that cartouche, we flipped it on its side, and looked at the cross-section. And we took depths based on that. What you can really see on that, there we go, is what we're calling the scooping effect. On this here, you can just see this white line. That white line is a line that I inputted. It's an artificial line, but it shows you artificial level. That is at exactly 100% level. And so you can see this is the right cartouche, which is this one. You can see how it scoops. And what they did was they came in and they shaved it real quick so they could put somebody else's name on top. Based on this data, now this left cartouche, is damaged. You can see the damage that runs right through the middle of it here, which is then reflected here. So it's hard to give you any data from the left one from this angle, but the right one, you can clearly see that scooping effect. And basically what we came down to say is, look, the depth does not support more than one usurpation. We had the original pharaoh and the second guy, and that's it. I don't care who they are. We do. But for the purposes of looking at depth only, I don't care who they are. You can only have one pharaoh and one usurpation. And this is what photogrammetry can help you do in the field. But we use photogrammetry not as the end stage. It is not the last thing that we do. Epigraphy is the very last thing that we do in recording ancient reliefs. Epigraphy is the traditional recordation method for preserving ancient reliefs. Epigraphy goes beyond its definition as simply the study of inscriptions into conservation of these inscriptions as well. In the early 1900s, James Breasted, who is the founder of the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago, said this: "The purpose of Egyptological epigraphy lies in its preservations of inscriptions, carvings, and reliefs by non-destructive means through documentation so precise it could stand alone as a replacement in the absence of the original monument." And that's what we seek to do. Lanny Bell, in an article called New Kingdom Epigraphy, says this: "Epigraphy is essential to gathering of reliable and complete primary data for research into many aspects of Egyptian culture, including studies in philology, art, history, religion, and society." Epigraphy is as simple as taking a pen and a pad and going and drawing at the wall, but it is much more specific than that. It is documentation so precise it could stand in the absence of the original monument. Dr. Janzen earlier showed you our wall and the deteriorating nature of our wall, and it certainly is. He called her ugly. I would never say that. But yeah, I would never call her that. He doesn't know her like I do. She's beautiful to me in her own way. But she has been out in the sun a little too long. But it is in all sense, though, deteriorating, and it does need work. And so we are doing our best to record everything. We use photogrammetry to produce the orthophoto. Again, you've heard about this, and it serves as the foundation for our digital drawings. We then reduce this orthophoto down into a single scene. We then take that scene, which at this point is hard to see some of the details, and we draw the scene over the top. What we do is we take out some of the damage. We actually draw the damage in Illustrator, but in Illustrator what we can do is we draw the damage as a single layer. And all I do is unclick that, making it much, much easier to see the actual inscriptions on the wall. We even go through it and re-record the blocks as well. It's not just, hey, we're looking at the inscriptions, we're recording the blocks, we're recording what everything looks like. We're showing you where the blocks are missing. We're showing you what it looks like up on the top. We record every single detail that's on the wall. And again, this is only after one full season of collation. This will be refined and refined to look better and better. Epigraphy combines the methods of high-resolution photography and photogrammetry to produce a scientific recordation of Merneptah's reliefs. So why do photogrammetry instead of laser scanning? Well, number one is cost. I've already talked about how much laser scanning does. But more importantly, as an academic institution, the Tandy is intent on teaching their students. Photogrammetry can be done with a high-quality camera and software. And more importantly, it can be done by students. We can teach you how to do it in a single season. It takes longer to perfect it, but we can teach you how to do that process. Laser scanning must be done by a professional. And at the Tandy, Dr. Ortiz, Dr. Davis, Dr. Janzen are intent on teaching us. That's why they've involved me in this process, and I thank them for that. So that is how we record ancient monuments, and that's how we record our ancient monument at Karnak. Thank you.